Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib, thank you so much for joining Oh My World. Thank you for joining all of us in the Geeks and sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to speak to you.
We're the lucky ones. I'm the one who's excited. Ahmed is a Palestinian American humanitarian activist and blogger. And he's actually from Gaza and he writes extensively on Gaza's political and humanitarian affairs. He's also been a very outspoken critic of Hamas and a promoter of coexistence and peace as the only path forward between Palestinians and Israelis. He's currently a resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council with the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative. And the reason, Ahmed, that I'm so excited to have you in particular is because you have an incredible story. You are an amazing voice of reason at a time when there isn't a lot. And I genuinely believe that you and your work will inspire people and help get to peace in the region. And so with that, I want to start, if you will, with your story. I can't imagine that the work that you're doing now is what you thought you would be doing as a child or even just a couple years ago. So can you walk us through that a little bit, how you got to the United States, and then ultimately how you landed where you are now?
Certainly. Well, thanks again for having me. Delighted to speak to you. We first met in Oslo this last summer, and I've just been fascinated to follow your show ever since. So I came to the United States as a 15-year-old exchange student with the United States government. It was a post 9/11 initiative by the State Department to bring young Middle Eastern students to be with a host family for a year, go to high school, experience the United States, and then go back to your native homeland and theoretically build cultural bridges. So I came from Gaza, and upon doing the program and upon completing the year, I attempted to go back through Egypt, which is how Palestinians in Gaza, that is largely closed off to the world, get in and out of the coastal enclave. I was stuck in Egypt. Unfortunately, Hamas abducted Gilad Shalit at the time as a young Israeli soldier, and that started a mini war that was soon followed by the 33-day war with Hezbollah in the north, between Israel and Hezbollah. And so I was in Egypt for 3 months, unable to go back into my native homeland. And thanks to the support of allies who are peace and humanitarian and human rights activists here in the United States, in the San Francisco Bay Area where I had lived the first year, I managed to come back to the US and lived in California with a host mother. I finished the last year of high school and then began applying for political asylum in the United States. And the very day of my asylum interview was the very day that Hamas violently took over the Gaza Strip. That was June 14th, 2007. And so for me, that initiated a new journey, if you will, in the United States to pursue my education, build up my network of friends and allies. I received a bachelor's in business administration, worked in not the nonprofit world for many years, and 10 years ago in 2014, I became a United States citizen. So things, started shifting for me in 2022 in the sense that I started a master's program in intelligence and national security studies. I was curious about this world, and I was, instead of getting a degree in international relations, I always knew that I wanted to work in this field, but this was a different, taking a security approach to international relations was always something I was intrigued by. Last year, I got my master's. I had been for the last 8.5 years working in international development in Africa, mainly, where poverty alleviation, global health, neglected tropical diseases with a philanthropic organization. And then, unfortunately and sadly, October 7 happened, and that really turned my life upside down on numerous fronts. I knew immediately that this was going to be a disaster of epic proportions for not just the Israelis, but certainly the people of Gaza. I knew that I'd been tracking different developments in the lead up to October 7 that told me something bad is going to be happening in there. I had no idea it would be at this scale or that Hamas would in fact be successful, unfortunately, in carrying out this attack. And so I knew I had to speak out, and I knew I needed to put myself out there. I knew that this was a point of no return, and that I was horrified by the dehumanization of Israeli victims and the celebration of what Hamas had done. I was certainly horrified by the dehumanization of the Palestinian people and painting them as all terrorists and they're all Hamas, and the priming of populations to really expect Gaza to be flattened and annihilated. And also, I wanted to build bridges at a time when it was hardest, at a time when it was least popular. I thought it was critical now more than ever to act in this no man's land, if you will, in between the entrenched narratives of pro-Palestine and pro-Israel, and normalize the idea that multiple things can be true at once, that both people's aspirations for freedom, independence, security, safety, self-determination do not have to be mutually exclusive, and that's that's what it'll take to break this vicious cycle of hatred, violence, incitement, revenge, rinse and repeat, rather than a top-down political agreement that everybody looks to transform the conflict. And finally, unfortunately, once my worst fears were realized, and that my family, immediate and extended, ultimately experienced the war up close, and I lost dozens of them who were killed in 3 separate Israeli airstrikes at the homes that I'd grown up in, Gaza City in the north, where I lived with my family, and in Rafah in the south. And so that further bolstered the need for me personally, to do the hard work, to really not give in to the hate and to the rhetoric. And I have grievances with the Israeli government. I'm upset and furious at the conduct of the military operation and the far right and the settlements and the military occupation. But that does not mean an inherent hatred for all Israelis. That does not mean that I can't see a path forward that is different. That does not mean that I want to pursue revenge as a strategy. Instead, what it means for me is I'm choosing to honor the legacy of my family members by building bridges and pursuing something different, and connecting with families of hostages and connecting with victims of October 7th. And sometimes that's easier than others. Sometimes it's exceptionally difficult because I'm only human who experiences all the human tendencies. And I try my best. And that's ultimately what led me to the world of writing, publishing, putting myself out there, being active on social media, attending conferences, events, demos, vigils, etc. And that's how we met. And that was when I was a keynote speaker at the Oslo Freedom Forum. And ultimately, that led to me finding this space, if you will, under the Atlantic Council, which is a unique think tank that both has the relevance and the respect here in DC, but is kind of a middle of the road, bipartisan, nonpartisan organization that allows me to build my platform. And I just got to DC a month and a half ago, and here we are.
Amazing. Ahmed, you have such an amazing way of talking about these issues in a very, it's on one hand so matter of fact and so honest and truthful, and yet also so empathetic. And it shouldn't be a surprise that we need this kind of way of talking about it, but we do, and it's hard to come by. And so I want to encourage people to go see your pinned tweet on your page on X, where you have a long explanation of what it means to be pro-Palestinian. And so, but in the interest of time, could you sum up for us a little bit what it means to be pro-Palestinian, what you have in that tweet basically, and what your purpose is, how you view your purpose and what you're fighting for, and how you hope to get there?
Certainly. Well, I mean, one of the things about the pro-Palestine community is that there's a lot there that exists in the grassroots. So there's a lot of emotions. There's a lot of, like and I've been in that world. I've participated in that world years ago. And unfortunately, I think it has consistently failed in moving the needle for the Palestinian community and the Palestinian people at a policy level. Certainly, it has grown in numbers and reach in terms of, yes, we see a lot of protests and demos and this and that, but there's nothing behind it. There's nothing that harnesses this energy, this enthusiasm, this empathy, and builds it into transformative actions on the ground. Unfortunately, I do see the proliferation of things that are troubling, whether it be the overly simplistic narratives or the reductionist views, maximalist views, or the overt support for Hamas and terrorism, the armed resistance narrative. And that's not everybody, obviously, but I'm just saying there's tiers and layers upon layers of troubling developments in what is known as the pro-Palestine community. Many of whom are well-meaning, good people that I don't doubt their intentions, but intentions alone are inadequate in moving this issue forward. And so as much as I don't like to be this black and white, us versus them, up or down, I identify as pro-Palestine in part to reclaim what it means to be pro-Palestine, to reshape that narrative. And there are many Palestinians in our community who, while they're all united in wishing that our people would have sovereignty, independence, and freedom, and be free of the killing and be free of the settlements and the military occupation, there are many who don't really have a political home to express or exercise or connect with nuanced perspectives about what it means to be a Palestinian, what it means to navigate this conflict 76 years ago, later rather, following so many different ideologies and perspectives and groups. And we had the Pan-Arabism and the PLO's secularism and the PFLP's Marxism and now Hamas's Islamism, like these different strains of ideologies that consistently keep failing our people. I don't see that there's space for the Palestinian community, at least internally, to be critical of our mistakes and to look back and make assessments. And unfortunately, there are some unhelpful allies, liberal leftist allies, who promulgate this idea that, you know, the Palestinians are perpetual victims who can do no wrong and can't be expected to have agency because they're perpetually occupied and because of the power imbalance that exists. And I acknowledge this power imbalance in the dynamics, with clearly one side having overwhelming power over the other. Nevertheless, even within the confines of that, I believe in Palestinian agency. I believe that we can make different choices. I believe that we can orient ourselves and our speech and our priorities and our behavior in a way that not only doesn't, you know, saves us from war and violence and promotes peace and coexistence, but actually like serves us, like actually wins us broader empathy, broader support in policy circles, and forces the extremist elements, that forces the hands rather of the extremist elements within Israeli society who love, in a sense, what Hamas is doing because they can claim there's no partner for peace. They can claim that the Palestinians are all extremists. They can claim that Israel is in this perpetual self-defense battle. So that tweet was an attempt to try to capture the nuance views, if you will, that I am pro-Palestinian in the sense that I support the Palestinian people's right to independence and freedom, liberation, self-determination, statehood, and sovereignty. I acknowledge the grievances, the historic grievances of the Palestinian people, but I also believe that those are not just the result of Israeli actions, that, you know, the Arab world and the Arab governments of the 50s and 60s and 70s, if you will, have repeatedly made mistakes that at the time severely undermined the Palestinian people. I acknowledge that there are legitimate grievances, but at the same time, I denounce the continual adoption, if you will, of the armed resistance narrative as something that is legitimate. There's a difference between what is theoretically right and what is smart and effective. Also, I acknowledge that even if you want to make the case that the Palestinians have a right to resistance, that is not like a blank check to commit crimes and to attack civilians and to do what happened on October 7th and attempt to basically justify that away by saying it's a symptom, it's an explosion against the symptom and the root causes, etc. I promote the examination of the mistakes that were conducted by the Palestinian leadership. I denounce Hamas as is effectively the enemy of the Palestinian people, and by highlighting very specific actions that they did, like sabotaging the fragile yet viable Oslo peace process that could have been a gateway into something resembling independence and sovereignty, and Islamizing Palestinian society, weaponizing the Second Intifada and carrying out all these suicide bombings that ultimately led to the separation wall, the peace camp in Israel, for squandering the 2005 opportunity with the withdrawal of Israeli settlements to turn Gaza into an effective role model of Palestinian self-governance that could have shown what an occupation-free West Bank would look like, abusing the democratic process in 2006, violently taking over Gaza in 2007, and then engaging in this vicious cycle of all these wars that killed a lot of people, destroyed Gaza, We would get reconstruction, billions of dollars were wasted, and rinse and repeat. To me, that's inseparable from Netanyahu and the far right, and even some fascist parties, religious parties within Israel. And this isn't necessarily like a moral equivalency per se, but Hamas is inseparable from the rise of the far right in Israel, and they fed off of each other. They helped Netanyahu undermine the Palestinian Authority, and so I don't go for these. I'm tired of hearing the same narratives, the same story that seek to perpetually paint us as victims and that we had nothing to do with where we're at. And yes, we are victims. I'm not denying that, but we're also victims of our own failed leadership. We're victims, unfortunately, of groupthink. I mean, there are Palestinians who individually hold beliefs, but we as a society are there's this enforced cohesion or enforced conformity that is absolutely detrimental. And I face the consequences of that. And I want to inspire others to think differently. And I want to inspire a new and rejuvenated pro-Palestine movement that is a lot more than simply being anti-Israel.
Well, if you don't mind, I want to follow up on something you mentioned that I thought was really important, because you're seeing a lot of those on the far left, a lot of young college protesters really turning to this talking point about being in favor of armed resistance, or that resistance by any means necessary. And you were just talking about it. Does that harm the cause then for peace, for coexistence, for two states? I mean, how do you view it sitting from where you are Palestinian American, you come from Gaza, you've lost all these family members on top of it, with the war, and how do you react when you hear this kind of rhetoric?
Well, I think it's incredibly ridiculous. It's harmful. It's one-dimensional. It's easy to cheer on Hamas's terrorism when you don't have to deal with the consequences of life under Hamas. And I don't mean just life under Hamas in the sense of dealing with the Israeli occupation or the Israeli violence or the war. I'm talking about just living in a society controlled by an Islamist organization that views its role beyond, that uses the resistance narrative to Islamize the society, to entrench its control, to maintain a deadly grip on power. So resistance is a lucrative business, and when it comes to obtaining administrative power, when it comes to siphoning off resources and stealing the Palestinian people's resources that could have built multiple states. And the PLO, in a sense, and the Palestinian Authority was also guilty of that. I mean, they squandered a lot of resources. Their corruption has been, decades in the making, if you will. And they became a one-party rule system that was ineffective and corrupt, and that in a way allowed Hamas to gain popularity and to rise. So I'm incredibly distraught that the young college students who are unfortunately, who on the one hand could be, custodians of this message, this pro-Palestine narrative, and they're going to be future leaders. They have an oversized influence, if you will, on society, on culture, on media, on pop culture. And instead of leveraging that to really push forward a meaningful narrative that actually simply shows the Palestinians as wanting nothing but freedom and independence, and separating them from Hamas, and separating them from Iran's axis of resistance, and the Houthis and Hezbollahs and the Ayatollahs and all these Islamist groups of the world. Instead of doing that, they've doubled down on Hamas as this amazing resistance group that they think is the only one fighting for Palestinian rights, when that's absolutely not only not the case. Hamas is the enemy of the Palestinian people. Hamas gets Palestinians killed. Hamas has made horrendous choices. Hamas has served the interests of anti-Palestinian forces in Israel. And so I'm incredibly distraught. And also, they're very emotionally driven. I have exercised a lot of emotional intelligence to harness my emotions and redirect them in a meaningful manner. And I think unfortunately, you have a responsibility if you're going to speak on this issue to be a good custodian and to act in a manner that really helps the Palestinian people instead of enabling a bunch of narcissists who are ignorant of the true realities on the ground and the true history and go for this really like these harmful narratives that show the Palestinian people as all supporting violence and all like reinforcing the stereotypes, getting the pro-Israel side and the Jewish community to be further entrenched and to put up their walls instead of having them see us as human beings. And that to me is what's really harmful and detrimental and hurtful and painful. And some of these kids will grow out of it. Some of them, unfortunately, are being kind of put on a pedestal as these amazing heroes. Many of them aren't even Palestinian or Arab or Muslim, and they're speaking over other Palestinians. They're speaking for the Palestinians. And I'm tired of our story. And that's not to say there aren't Palestinians or Arabs or Muslims who are being equally, I think, damaging and harmful in how they speak about this issue. But there's this like radicalization of the community in the diaspora outside of Gaza. And what's funny is like you look at people in Egypt and Jordan and college campuses and in Western capitals, and a lot of them are cheering on Hamas, but people in Gaza are turning on Hamas and they're attacking Hamas and they're saying that this is a deadly menace that has harmed our people, delegitimized our struggle for national statehood and nationhood. And that's what I'm trying to expose is that this is a fraud. Hamas is not a resistance organization. Hamas is a nefarious, narrow-minded organization that has hijacked the Palestinian people, that has hijacked the Palestinian narrative. And by the way, one of the things that, I mean, and I focus about this because this, I mean, like the fact that I focus on Hamas so much, so many people are like, well, why aren't you talking about Israel? Great, talk about Israel. Criticize the Israeli government. Do all you want, but I mean, you have a right to freedom of speech, but create space for calling things for what they are, which is that Hamas is a vile terror organization. What happened on October 7th was a crime against humanity. That doesn't mean the subsequent war in Gaza, in which many of my family were killed, isn't equally criminal in some aspects. I understand that Israel had to respond like any nation would have responded. On the other hand, I think what has happened has gone far beyond responding. What has happened has gone far beyond trying to retrieve the hostages. This is an absolutely criminal activity that happened on October 7th that needs to be called for what it is. That doesn't harm the Palestinian narrative, it bolsters it. That doesn't take away from the humanity of the Palestinians, and emboldens it and bolsters the idea that Palestinians are multidimensional, they are diverse people, and they are not just these bloodthirsty, terror-loving subjects that are just eager to kill Jews.
That's right. All right, Ahmed, I want to turn a little bit looking forward. Especially given your how vocal you are against extremism and Hamas in particular. Now you've seen the Israeli government really has decimated Hamas's military capabilities, their governing capabilities. That said, do you have some kind of hope for Gaza for the day after, for new leadership? And I don't want to be naive. I know, it's almost impossible to eradicate these groups entirely. But given how much they've been disrupted, do you have some hope that Gaza won't be governed by a future Hamas, for example? How are you feeling about everything happening right now?
I mean, I certainly have hope, broadly speaking, though in the immediate term, things are incredibly hopeless. I mean, the Israeli operations in northern Gaza are annihilating the entirety of the Jabalia area, even though I understand there's a presence of Hamas at the same time. Northern Gaza is being emptied of its people. The southern part of the Gaza Strip is equally facing the onslaught of the military operations, and hundreds of people are being killed weekly. And like short term, just the daily images are just heartbreaking and immensely difficult. That said, what has been, on the one hand, yes, the Israeli military has succeeded in decimating most of Hamas's command and control structure, such that the group has been reduced to disparate cells that are operating independently. We effectively have 5 or 10 Hamases, if you will, that exist in Gaza. nothing has emerged that can come close to replacing the group or being an alternative. And I don't mean just an alternative in terms of thought leadership or the ethos of how do we go about, Palestinian for the Palestinian national project, if you will. I'm talking more in terms of just who's going to govern, who's going to deliver basic services, who's going to provide security, who's going to hold the areas that Hamas is cleared from, who's going to actually do anything that allows Hamas, who's going to actually do anything for the Palestinian civilian population in Gaza, such that Hamas doesn't respond, such that, I strongly believe that the people of Gaza have en masse turned against Hamas. I believe that there will never be any organization that can do what Hamas did for 17 years, hijack the Palestinian people and hold them hostage to a failed armed resistance project. I think after this war, that just you can't fool the Palestinian people in the same way that Hamas has. However, we need somebody to go in there and actually hold the place. And if it's Netanyahu says it's not the Palestinian Authority, it's not the international this, it's not the international that, he wanted to have the clans and the tribes, many of whom are partly responsible for Hamas's rise to power, in that these clans exercised a lot of thuggery and crime, and they have their weapons and their guns, and they destabilize the society. And so what Hamas what did is actually clip their wing and kind of brought them under the government, like created a monopoly on violence, if you will, such that there were many in Gaza who appreciated that Hamas had done that. And Netanyahu, ignorantly or deliberately, thought that somehow the clans were a good idea when it's an absolute disaster. Then it's like the Palestinian Authority. Okay, I understand they have all of their problems, all of their issues, but they remain, largely speaking, as a framework, not necessarily as an immediate framework. They remain the only viable, legitimate Palestinian body that can assume responsibilities, that can be a part of a rejuvenated administration, that can have new security forces retrained with Jordanian, Emirati, and American and Arab support. So there are alternatives. They exist. And by the way, when people ask about like future Palestinian leaders, there are numerous mid-level administrators, professionals, technocrats, academics, NGO practitioners, and academics whom you and I don't even know their name. But if they're given a fair chance, we're talking about a large population that is highly educated, the lowest illiteracy rates in the Middle East, highly capable of, when given a chance, to be part of effective self-governance. I have no doubt that within a few years, once you stabilize Gaza post-conflict, post-war, we will witness the emergence of a new cadre of professional Palestinians who are capable of governance, who are capable of replacing Hamas. But in the immediate sense, we're going to need a transitional period. And I think the Palestinian Authority is going to have to be involved, even if this entails peacekeeping forces, Arab peacekeepers, European peacekeepers, and other alternatives that could be a part of Gaza's renaissance, not just reconstruction, but Gaza's renaissance and rejuvenation, to ensure that this is the Strip's last war.
That's really, Ahmed, as I said, you're super inspiring. And, when I worked in the White House, we used to say it was who's going to pick up the trash the next day. And so I understand that completely. And I really hope that everything you've laid out happens, with everything being so bleak. And so this is going to be my last question, and I want to bring it back personal. With everything being so bleak at the moment, how do you maintain hope? How do you keep going and fighting for this brighter future that you've just painted?
Well, and it's difficult, right? I'm not an emotionless being. Like it's a struggle, like especially over the past few weeks. It has been an exceptionally difficult struggle to just stay motivated, to get out of bed, to be inspired, to look at the news and carry on. At the same time, I feel strongly that while there is bleakness at this very moment, the numbers of Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians who look to me and say, thank God someone else is saying this. Thank God you're saying what we know is true, but no one else is saying it. And we're too afraid, or our families are crazy, or we're so integrated in the Arab and Muslim and Palestinian communities that it's harder for us to speak out. tells me that there could be an opportunity to create a new narrative, a rejuvenated narrative, or even to create a new political home for like-minded Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims who feel that the current discourse is inadequate, who feel that the current set of events and activism and advocacy is not only unrepresentative rather of all the diversity within our community, but that it is actually harmful. It is actually not helping us. It is actually squandering a once in a generation, once in a lifetime opportunity to drum up support for the Palestinian people. The thousands of Israelis and Jews in the diaspora in Israel and Zionists and right wing, center left, liberals, all across the spectrum who tell me that I've basically almost single-handedly helped restore their faith in the possibility of peace with the Palestinian people, that I've helped humanize Palestinian people for them, that I've helped them show that there are rational Palestinian voices, that I've helped them see things differently, acknowledge that there are innocent people in Gaza who are being killed, that I've helped them see the nefarious actions of their own government in a different light, and the injustice of the military occupation. Those are otherwise unreachable audiences that the mainstream pro-Palestine movement doesn't reach, and in fact alienates. And so that in itself gives me hope. And then finally, like I said, I see a shift in Gaza in a way that I haven't seen in the past of the Palestinian people there turning against the Islamist group en masse, such that I don't think they'll ever be able to do this again, of holding us hostage to this armed resistance narrative. So I'm full of hope that this really is going to be Gaza's last war. I've met amazing people along this difficult journey over the past year, and that also gives me hope that there's a new community. I walked away from a quiet, decent life that I had before this, that I miss so much. I don't really like being. I mean, I am reluctant in one sense. I do a good job of it, fine, whatever. But I am reluctant in that, like, it's unpleasant. I get attacked all day, every day by people from both sides. I have safety issues. It's very frustrating. There's for as much as there is support for me, there's a lot of antagonism towards what I'm saying and attempts to delegitimize me and say you're not a real Palestinian and to enforce that conformity. And I'm unfazed by it. I don't care what, people have their own opinions and they're entitled to them, but no one is going to take away my right as a Palestinian with literal battle scars, with the tragedy that had befallen my family, with the sense of I love my people, and that is precisely why I'm doing this. Like, I'm not seeking to be a token for the Jews and the Zionists as my detractors often accuse me of. I see an opportunity amidst the horror to actually fundamentally change Gaza's trajectory in a way that could actually serve as a gateway for removing the occupation of the West Bank, removing the violence and the settlements and achieving a two-state solution. But that needs a rejuvenated narrative. It's not just a top-down peace negotiation. We can't have a narrative that is based on from the river to the sea. We want it all. We don't want 48. We don't want 67. We want 48. Like, that is a problem, and I'll close by saying that I do feel that at an individual level, if you will, and even some organizational level, there are a lot of viable Jewish and Israeli allies whom I think we can absolutely make things work with and build a coalition together to pursue this. And that doesn't mean, I mean, some people want separation between Palestinians and Israelis. Some people want interconnected cooperation. And I think both can be true at once. I do think there needs to be two separate homes, two separate nations for two separate people, regardless of the finalized borders and what that looks like. Two nations that are intertwined in a sense of neither one of their people is going anywhere. So the totality of this, like sometimes stepping back from the immediacy of it, there are nuggets of hope throughout. Like I said, the people that I've met, the people that I hear from, my genuine belief in the opportunities. And so that keeps me in the fight. That keeps me going.
Amazing. Well, Ahmed, I think you are very, very brave. I think you are super intelligent and very enlightened. And I just think that if you keep at it, everyone will see that light that you bring and will follow. And I really appreciate you and I appreciate your work. And thank you for doing it. I know I'm among the group of us who are saying thank you for speaking out the way you do. You are truly an inspiration. But I also really believe that there's light at the end of this. So thank you again.
Inshallah. I appreciate your support. I appreciate the love. And maybe I think once this war ends, hopefully soon, if it ever does, there will be a lot of hope and opportunities, and the temperature will come down. And that's what I'm trying to position myself, is to be ready to go with concrete, actionable steps that move us forward. So thank you for the support.
Thank you. You keep up the good work, Ahmed.
Inshallah. Thank you.